Good morning, everyone. My name's Lucy Morris, and I work at British Red Cross as a National Society Development and Partnership Advisor. And British Red Cross are the co-chairs of this Bond Partnership Approaches group along with CAFOD. So I'm going to be chairing today's call, so welcome to you all. Hope you can hear me okay. The focus of today's webinar is going to be on complex partnerships, so including working in consortia and networks. And so I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share your experiences, but also to share WaterAid's experiences. So we're very happy to have two presenters from WaterAid today, really kicking off the conversation. And so what we're going to do today is really to have a couple of presentations, and it's going to be a springboard for discussion. So we'd really encourage you to be active participants in today's call. And what I'd love to do first of all, before we get going proper, is just to go through one by one to introduce each other. I can see lots of people are still joining, so it's going to be a popular call. I think some people will be joining slightly later, but I think if we get going, and if you can just take it in turns if you click on the participants box, you'll see a list of everyone who's on the call at the moment. And then if you can just unmute one by one and just say briefly what your name is, which organisation you work for, and a little bit about your experiences, very briefly, of working in partnerships, particularly in more complex partnerships. So Jane, it looks like you're top of the list at the moment. Do you mind kicking us off? Can you hear me okay?
Hello, everyone. My name is James Galgalo. I work for CAFOD as an emergency program officer, and I'm based in Kenya, and in Kenya, I'm based in the north of Kenya, Isiolo. Previously, before I took the current position, I was working as a capacity building officer, and therefore I worked very closely with the partners, and therefore did a lot of capacity building work with CAFOD partners based in Kenya. And in that process, we had lengthy discussion related to partnerships and accountability and other partnership-related issues. That is my experience.
That's great. Very nice to meet you, James. Welcome. Emily, it looks like you're next on the list. Can you just give us a brief introduction?
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm joining from HelpAid International. I'm based in the London office. I think we might have another HelpAid colleague joining as well. Really nice to meet you all. Looking forward to learning more about how everyone's worked in consortia.
Great, thanks Emily, welcome. Mimi, it looks like you're next on the list. How do I can hear you.
Aha. I thought I was on mute automatically. Apologies.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Mimi Coltas, and I work with the South Asia WASH Results Programme, which is a consortium led by Plan International UK with WaterAid and others. I'm based in London, and the programme's in Bangladesh.
That's great. Thanks, Mimi. Welcome. Barbara, it looks like you're next on the list.
Hi, yeah, I'm Barbara. I also work at Plan International UK, and I'm a program manager here, based in the London office, and support my team in working a number of consortia and complex partnerships as well.
That's great. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you.
So Emily, we've had already. Ian, do you want to give just a really brief introduction? I'll give you a proper introduction before you give your presentation, but just say hello to everyone, please.
Hi, I'm Ian. I work at WaterAid, and one of my colleagues are Plan, Mimi and Barbara. We know each other as well.
Oh, okay.
South Asia WASH Results, which is a qualifies as a complex commercial contract too. So morning, everybody.
That's nice. So we've got networks within networks. So welcome, Ian. International HIV/AIDS Alliance, you're next up.
Hi, morning. This is Min. I'm from the International HIV/AIDS Alliance. I'm joined with a couple of colleagues. So we work in a variety of different consortia, some kind of regional and regional networks and national organisations, INGO consortia. So we're just interested to hear about and hear some interesting discussion.
Great, very welcome to you all. So Jap, I think you're the next.
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jaap van der Stelt. I'm working for VSO in the London office. And I am a team lead for our global bid development team. So in terms of working in a consortia, my experience is mainly around bid development, where I try to support different teams within VSO in making sure that we work through the interesting dynamics of working together in consortia when responding to a call for proposals mainly.
Great, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Jane, do you want to try again, see if your mic's working?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, sorry, technical problem as per usual. So, hi everyone, I'm Jane Swan. I'm the IDG, which is Development Group Coordinator at CAFOD, and I'm the other co-chair of the group. I'm not directly responsible for partnerships here at CAFOD, but I've supported the work quite closely over the last 4 or 5 years. I don't have much experience of working in consortia, so I'm probably going to be listening more than contributing, but I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone's got to say.
Great, welcome Jane. John, I think you're next up.
Hi, yeah, sorry about that. So, so I also work at Plan International UK. I also work on the South Asia WASH Results Programme, so I've worked with Ian and worked with Mimi. I've worked in a few consortia and interested to find out whether there are challenges and opportunities with other similar programmes.
That's great, you're welcome. And Justin, you're next.
Hi everybody, I'm the country manager for British Red Cross in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I've been working quite a lot in the operational alliance and remote partnership with our implementing parties. And more recently, I've been supporting our partners in as an implementing party within consortia groups, especially around risk management. So I'm quite interested about this. Thank you.
Great, thanks Justin. Nice to have some Red Cross staff on the call as well, so thanks for joining. And Kemi, I think you're next.
Hello, good morning. I'm Kelechi Abe, the country representative for CAFOD based in Nigeria. In terms of consortia, CAFOD working closely with other sister agencies, but that's basically agencies that we are familiar with. And so I also listen, like Jen earlier mentioned, like to listen and understand how we could also collaborate with agencies with slightly different values, unlike us, and see how that could work in practice. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks for joining. And Liz, you're next. Hi Liz, can you hear us? I can't hear you. Looks like you're unmuted, but you're not coming through. So I think if we go on to the next person on the list, and then we'll come back to you, Liz, if you can get connected. So Lovi, I think you're the next person. So Lovi's another one of our presenters, so I'll introduce him properly shortly, but do you want to just say hello briefly to people? Sorry, Lovi, we missed you. I think you're on mute. Do you want to try again? Yeah, I can hear you now. Do you want to just briefly say hello to people and just introduce yourself and your organisation?
I'm Luvi Raslufmanan, the country director for Water at Madagascar. I'm based in Antananarivo.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Sophie, you're next on the list.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I work in the Performance and Accountability team with Lucy for the British Red Cross.
Great, welcome Sophie. And Tracy?
Hi, I'm Tracy. I work for Plan International and I'm the coordinator for partnership development and strengthening civil society.
Great, welcome Tracy, nice to have you on the call. And Tricia, you're next.
Hi, I'm Tricia from Muslim Aid. I'm the head of institutional funding. And so I work a lot with our country offices around consortium partnerships, and I've also managed a few consortiums in the past.
Great, you're welcome. And last but not least, Vivian, would you like to say hello? So it looks like Vivian's not replying, but we'll see if she joins us later. So we've also just had a message through from Liz who says, sorry, mic appears not to be working. I'm at Christian Aid as Programme Manager for a consortium project being run in partnership with ActionAid, CARE, CAFOD, Tier Fund and Oxfam and local and national partners in countries that are very interested in the chat today. And Vivian's just explaining she doesn't have a microphone, but she's from British Red Cross and she's a PMIL advisor. So warm welcome to everyone. It's really nice to meet you, and I think hopefully it's broken the ice a bit when it comes to conversations later on. So the format for the call today is going to be 2 presentations from WaterAid followed by questions. And then we'll open up for the wider discussion around complex partnerships. So we've got an hour and a half in total. We may find we don't need all of that time, so we'll see how we go. And you're welcome to add questions into the chat box as people are talking, and I'll try and harvest those. But also please feel free to ask questions direct after the presentations. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our 2 presenters from WaterAid. So on the call today we've got Luvi Rasulofomana, and Luvi is the country programme manager for WaterAid in Madagascar, as he said earlier. So he's been in that position for 7 years. He's an economist by training, but he's worked mainly for social development both in Mali and Madagascar for the last 25 years. He's very keen to advocate for the importance of water and sanitation services in poverty reduction and human development. So Luvi is an active player in the sanitation and water for all processes alongside other organisations, and he's really passionate about achieving the sustainability and equity of water and sanitation services with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals, both at local and global levels. And our second presenter is Ian Gavin. So Ian currently heads the Business Development Unit at WaterAid UK, where he's worked for more than 4 years. He's also worked in international development for over 20 years. So his first 10 were actually with the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, initially with the British Red Cross, and then with the International Federation in the former Yugoslavia and Southern Africa. And he's been head of programmes and operations in Africa for GOAL, for Concern Worldwide, and for the Malaria Consortium. And he's also successfully managed a multi-million-pound, 100% payment by results commercial subcontract to DFID with WaterAid. So a huge amount of experience to share. So thanks to you both for sharing your experiences today. And I will hand over to Ian to start off the presentations.
Hi, everybody. So thanks for the introductions there. So the presentation we have today was a slightly stripped down version of an internal webinar we had. Our partnership lead, Louisa, thought it'd be nice to share with this group. I thought it might also be worth flagging there is another bond group, a commercial contracting group, for those interested in the slightly more hard-nosed commercial aspects of partnerships, similar to the sort of South Asia Water Results programs that quite a few people in the call have been involved with, my plan colleagues and myself. Those are sort of commercial contracts and 100% payment by results. Those sort of slightly sharper, more business-like contracts are picked up on the bond commercial contracting group, which will have some useful lessons to share with this one, I'm sure. So in terms of the talk, I wasn't sure the audience. It's a mixed audience, but quite a lot of experience out there. I was just going to have 5 or 6 slides just to introduce the subject. And but the main story really is how WaterAid has become more familiar with these commercial contracts over the past few years. We're certainly nowhere near as big as some of the big boys, you know, the Save the Children's, CARES, and Oxfams. So we've had a less experience for a shorter time, but we've certainly opened ourselves up to the idea of some of these more commercial contracts, working with the likes of USAID, for example, and some of the large complex consortia. And this is a mini story of how we've got there. So Louis, if you can switch forward to the next slide, please. Thank you. Like I say, these are some of the slides presented internally to WaterAid to help us with our journey to better understand and engage in commercial contracts. Some of this might be oversimplified for the audience, some of it not. But broadly speaking, we did try to remind people who sometimes felt quite intimidated at these consortia that we already work in a large number of consortia, and not to be too intimidated. However, we also wanted to be clear that these consortia, we have a clear internal definition that, you know, it's a group of organizations for a common purpose, but the fact that it's bound by a formal agreement, a legal agreement with defined roles and responsibilities. There's lots of grey lines between definitions, but we want to be very clear to people when we mean consortia, we mean something with a written agreement, time-bound. Now, the reason why we won't have all the sort of background of global funding trends, but most of the audience seem to be quite familiar with fundraising and global trends, but obviously donors are giving fewer and fewer calls of a larger and larger size and magnitude, requiring consortia to come together to be able to deliver that. Also, as the likes of DFID, for example, have less internal capacity, things like monitoring and supervising their own grants, to capture learning, etc. They expect consortia to do that. So the addition of learning partners or M&E partners within your consortia to try and provide a one-stop solution for donors. So some of those sort of global trends were the things explained and reflected upon within WaterAid to explain why we're moving towards these. I won't labour the benefits too much and the disadvantages next. But the theoretical advantage is, of course, that you have a improved design because of a broader range of skills. And certainly we felt there has been some positive aspects of sharing with peers and be able to draw on a full range of skills from across a large number of organizations. Certainly the inclusion of an academic partner, for example, has been very helpful in terms of being capturing learning in a more formal way, or technical M&E partners have encouraged us to up our game and be better at documenting our M&E processes, for example, and payment by results. Obviously, more partners can have a larger geographical scope. There's shared risks. Most of these large consortia are multi-million pound, if not tens of, and it's way beyond the sort of comfort level of single INGOs to engage with. Sharing of expertise. The peer accountability we have reflected has been useful. I don't know if there's any truth for it, but there's sort of general truisms they say is that donor-funded projects, restricted funded projects, sometimes perform better than unrestricted ones because there is that oversight. Well, if you add in consortium members who are working on a week-by-week, if not day-by-day process with you, it does increase accountability, and we think it does lead to better quality programming when you're more accountable. The scale, as mentioned earlier, these bigger budgets allow us to include research elements which we can't do with smaller programs. It just isn't financially viable or practical. And the other clear benefit is these very large programs can help with coordination and influencing at a national level. Thank you, Logan. Next slide, please. Obviously, there are plenty of disadvantages to working in consortia also. The harmonization of different processes can be quite complex. different culture, ethos, and that slow process of building trust. There's a quote here from Paolo, I think, that consortia are more political than they are technical. The other thing is it gets very complex for the multiple actors. It can be quite time consuming. We certainly reflected that they require a lot more demands from senior management than most smaller projects, which they delegate down to be run at a country level, and they don't sort of drag in country directors, senior managers, senior financial staff, and so forth from the head office quite as much as some of these consortia programs do. And that's before you have your firefighting, your conflict resolutions, harmonizing of systems, and so forth. Excuse me. They are quite bureaucratic at times, and of course there's a very large financial risk, even those through traditional grant mechanisms, let alone the more complex payment by results. Certainly where you have to fix payments, and I find NGOs as a whole tend to be quite too optimistic really, and unrealistic in their budgets and what they can deliver. And when you formalize those things and write quite tight legal contracts, you find you might paint yourself in a corner. The other sort of key obvious ones are reputational risk and brand identity. You are tied to an organization. Even if you don't have a joint venture agreement, your name is wrapped up with the works of others. So sometimes your risk is out of control. In terms of definitions, Louisa, our partnership manager, and myself quite liked this graphic we stole from Paolo again, I believe, to explain to people that you know, you might have alliances, you might be in coalitions, you might have some loosely organized networks, etc. But to explain that the consolidation of that and the legally binding natural progression of that will be a more formal consortia. And again, in terms of explaining within WaterAid, the fact that these will almost invariably be won through a competitive bidding process. And just finally, thank you, Lovi. The next slide, I'll talk about the sort of linear steps in forming a consortia. Now, these are nice, neat 1 to 8 steps, when in reality, it can be quite messy, especially the stages between identifying an opportunity and formally forming a consortia. You can go in cycles where you have a pre-teaming, you might start with a non-disclosure confidentiality agreement, and then have a pre-teaming agreement. Sometimes they may be adapted. You'll have an initial teaming agreement, which will likely have to be expanded and refined a number of times. Here I sort of noted the phase where you'll be making these decisions about whether to subcontract or to be a consortia lead or prime. And this is also the area where you'll be going in circles, refining your terms of reference and your precise role. We found this is the most complex area, sometimes with country programs not being clear enough exactly what they want to do, or maybe a potential consortia lead or prime partner trying to keep things quite vague and unclear, so you don't quite know exactly what it is you're signing up for. And there's risk of being abused in terms of bid candy or INGO being called into a consortium and being used to make it more attractive to the donor, but in reality you don't get much of a slice of the pie when the contract comes to fruition. So at that stage, I think we'll just wrap up. That's a summary of some of the sort of conversations and learning and internal webinars and training we've had to help WaterAid in its journey become more confident and less intimidated by consortia. But Lovi's going to talk for longer about some practical experiences, and in many ways he's helping lead the way to demystify and increase confidence in these consortia arrangements. Over to you, Lovi.
Presentation, I will first provide to you a background and a context of our consortia experience from Madagascar. And then I will talk about challenges and what lessons have we learned from the consortium. So for the first one, on backgrounds, we actually have quite a few experiences in terms of consortium, actually 4 of them. So the first one was in 2006, and the last one was in 2016. We actually responded to a bidding for European Union for one of it. And we had as well a chance to bid for an USAID project twice. And in 4 of them, we were successful for 2 of them. The one with water and sanitation for Urban-Poor that we started in 2007, in consortium with CARE, WWF, and Half Crow from the UK at the beginning. But now currently we are working with water and sanitation for Urban-Poor and ENDA on this project. So this is quite a very long consortium experience actually with WhatsApp. Otherwise, we have one currently with CARE as the lead of the consortium, and we have a partner with CARE and CRS in this project. So in terms of experiences, actually when we start a consortium, or even before the call for proposal, we need to look at organizational screening. So we have to ask some questions ourselves. For instance, do we have required competencies? What are missing for us as an organization? And we need as well to set up a mechanism to enable us to make a decision. Will you go or not, and with whom? Who could complement us as well in the proposal? What are our comparative advantages? And then we need also to have an idea of who are the people, the organization with who we will partner. And we have to look as well at the chance of the success, because given that we will have competitors as well, so we need to carry out intelligence on who will bid for the proposal. And we have to look as ASEAN sides, what are the risks as well for us in bidding and in the proposal. And in this one, we have to look as well on, will we approach organizations, or will we just wait for them to call us and to bid with? But all of this will depend as well on our position. Would we like to be a lead for the consortium, or just a sort of sub-awarded? And then we have to come up to the shaping of the consortium. So this is an iterative discussion. So we have to look at what are the responsibilities of each of the party there, to share as well the activities, and most importantly to have the common understanding of the bid or the call for proposal as well. So for instance, with CARE, for the project financed by USAID, CARE is in charge of the hygiene promotion, CRS in charge of the private and public partnership, and WaterAid is in charge of WASH governance in this particular project. And we need as well to look at the ways of working, not just for during the development of a proposal, but as well when we are implementing. So normally in this one, it's a mixed group leads by the prime, but there is definitely a sharing of responsibilities and roles to enable the consortium to be effective for the development of a proposal. We faced some challenges in doing this, but before that, I would like to share what we have gained from all of the consortium in which we are working. So we could be approached or searching partners, but what we can say as WaterAid is we always acknowledge as a WASH specialized organization. So this is looking at our unique selling points. And we also, by doing that, expand our relationship with other NGOs And this could be as well an entry point to new sectors. As water red is dedicated to water sanitation and hygiene, in being a member of a consortium, we could, for instance, work as well for nutrition or agriculture or environment or health. So this is complementary based on our specific mission. And in a joint proposal development as well, we have a lot of cross-fertilization from based on the experience of all members of the consortium. In terms of challenges, actually, we have a limited flexibility if we are not the lead of the consortium, because there are regulations set up by the consortium, and normally we have as a sub-awarded to follow up the lead of the consortium. The lead of the consortium has as well open eyes on cost in HR, for instance, or overhead allocation and other information. And as Jan said, a consortium could be a time-consuming process as well. And we found out that actually, if a partners have the same expertise, this is undermining as well the competition. So as a subcontractor, we do not have a direct contact with the donor. So this prevents us as well to sometimes to propose our ideas. In terms of what we gain from the consortium, we can also enrich and learn more from others, as I said earlier. And for instance, with WhatsApp, we learned a lot about water utility sanitation expertise and how to work with local governments. By being a member of a consortium, we improve as well the quality of our budget monitoring, finance, technical reports, and the way that we implement the project in the fields. And we have a teamwork together in the ground and a very high consultative process. With regard to the challenges, we have to manage a lot of demands while keeping our identity. Jan raised this as well as one of the challenge, because the lead of consortium always would like to put pressure on behalf of their headquarter or the donor. And we need to manage and create additional tools. And sometimes we have parallel tools as well, for instance, in terms of monitoring and evaluation. And the staff has to carry out both of tools imposed by the lead of the consortium or the donor, and our own tools, templates and procedures. And it's quite difficult as well to get approval. Sometimes it depends on the consortium. Otherwise, we always have to request the prime's approval for anything that we have to carry out. What we would like to do differently as an organization. So first of all, we need to update intelligence on the potential strategic organization to partner with. And in this one, it's even better, as in the Ian slides, to start with a collaboration or a conversation before the bidding, to enable us to know more on the partner. And the institutional arrangement is very crucial for us for the success of a partnership. And if we are partnering with organization, with other sector, it's strategic because we can raise funds and expand as well or reach and to enrich our knowledge and influence. But we need a guidance on a minimum standards to forge a consortium in terms of ethics, budgeting, cost sharing, and ways of working. We also need to look at our unique selling points before we begin, as I said earlier. And this is quite key, a clarification of roles and responsibility and ways of working at the early stage of the development of a proposal. So for that, we need a modus operandi before we start the implementation. And we need as well to set up a steering committee in the consortium to provide directions for the consortium. That's all for my presentation, and looking forward to your question.
Great, thank you very much, Luvi, and to Ian. So I suggest that we start by just taking any questions of clarification first of all. So did people have any questions on just kind of to check they'd understood properly the content of the presentations? And once we've checked that was all clear, then we can go into another round of broader questions about the content of the presentations themselves. So any questions of clarification first of all? No, all seems to have been very clear, so thank you. So let's move then into any broader questions that anyone had on the content of the presentations themselves. So if you want to ask a question, feel free either type in the chat box or preferably just unmute yourself and just ask the question direct. So while you're just having a think about questions, one that came to my mind was about whether WaterAid provides any special training in relation to managing consortia, because I think what you've described is quite a complex process, and it needs lots of different skill sets, whether you're the prime, whether you're leading the consortia, or whether you're a subcontracting member. So I was just wondering, Ian or Luvi, if you could say whether there's been any specific training developed around that.
This is Ian. I can chip in from headquarters point of view, and Luvi is welcome to chip in with constructive criticism, even from the country program point of view. We recognise that we don't have these kind of formal consultants in every single country. So in terms of general training to everybody, there's been some short guidelines developed, quite a few webinars. Also, what I think is very useful is Louisa, who couldn't join us today, unfortunately, who leads our program support unit and learning and quality programming. She leads our partnership approach. And over the past few years, she's been keen to ensure that our partnership approach is broadened and incorporates things like these sort of consortiums within them. So, so when they're having sort of regular partnership discussions, they also include things like these forms of consortium, which has been useful. So there's been a series of webinars, a general training, some tools, incorporating into our sort of mainstream, into our normal partnership processes. And thereafter, a lot of support is really tailored around individual bids, being a bit opportunistic. If a certain country team appears to be on the brink of joining a consortium, then the idea is to give them lots of tailored support, joining the negotiations sometimes with the prime, helping with the legal, the contracting, and giving extra support around the financial setup, pricing and costing, and then ensuring that the sort of project startups have extra support to handle the consortia. But there isn't a sort of standardized training course for all. Lovi, don't you want to chip in and see whether from the country programme point of view, whether that's enough, or maybe you might be looking for more?
Yeah, I think that's not Jan, but just to say that we have modules as well on how to work in a consortium for a contract bidding. So we have this module as well, but we have provided for the regional team in water.
Great, thank you. So one question has come in through the chat box, so from Justin at the Red Cross. So the question is, how do you balance the issues around parties wishing to be partners of equal footing in comparison to being subcontracting or just a defined implementing parties within a consortia? Let me just reread that. Issues around parties wishing to be partners of equal footing. Okay, so I think this is looking at the power dynamics within a consortia. So yeah, how do you balance all organizations wanting to have an equal status, if you like, versus, you know, having the prime and then just subcontracting? How do you manage that tension? And this is a question for you, but also for other people on the call. What are your experiences?
Okay.
Yeah, Lovi, you go first. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you know, in this one, so first of all, when there is a call for proposal, actually, a lot of people will approach you as an organization, and even at this stage, you have to make a decision with who will you partner with, and this will be based as well on all of their experience with regards to the proposal. And when you are together in the consortium, it's not yet legalized. Jan talked about the agreements, but before coming to that, you have to look at what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of the party in the consortium, and the final decision on who will be what. For instance, who will be the leader of the consortium and who will be just the members will be based on some criteria that the members of the consortium will set up. And in all of this, the unique selling points of each organization will be key as well to make the decision. But at the end of the day, you as an organization, you have to define yourself as well, your strategic position, if you'd like to be a leader of consortium or just a members, and this will be based on your, I guess, on your country program strategy.
Great, thanks, Lovi. Anything to add from your side, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, it's the heart of the question, really. So, yeah, and hello, Justin. We used to work together 20 years ago.
Oh, really?
Speak to you again. Yes, it's a good question, a key one, and one I think might be worth opening up to discussion. Because, I mean, from a legal and contractual point of view, there are some things that people can do, and certainly this came up in a recent bond commercial contracting group, even considering the fact that we could possibly, as INGOs, draft a general code of conduct as one idea to avoid becoming bid candy or abused or disempowered in your partnerships. I mean, at its most extreme, attempts to have a more equal or very, very clear role anyway. WaterAid has been involved in just one joint venture where you form a legal entity together, and it's very clear in that how the governance, the liability is all spelled out quite clearly, and you can theoretically anyway have an equal partnership. However, I mean, the bottom line is there always does tend to be a lead or a prime, and you can ask for certain things in your contract. I mean, things like the governance needs to be addressed very clearly in the contracts. Now, normally it says these things will be, decisions will be made by consensus, but the prime will quite reasonably always have to have a power of veto. And in reality, these things can work out in a very egalitarian fashion. Our partnership with Plan and our two Plan colleagues on the phone has worked out very well. You know, we resolve things in an amicable way. We we solve problems together. Legally, they could just talk to the donor themselves and just write the rule books themselves, but that's not what they do. They invite us to speak with the donor. So certainly in your contracting and negotiation, there are some things you can do. You can talk about the governance, you can talk about transparency, you can talk about representation, and try and pin down as much as possible. But even the joint venture, it's very hard to avoid a situation. There will be a lead or a prime who does have the larger financial and reputational risk, and they will protect themselves by having, voting or power veto rights over the sub. So it's quite hard to formally and legally do this. And I've had some legal arrangements which are quite generous in appearance, but the prime's been quite aggressive in practice, and vice versa. So I think there's only so much you can get addressed in your legal contracts. It's much more about traditional legwork of conversations, negotiations, and having as many conversations as possible before you actually get to the signing, I would say. But it's a key question, I think.
Great, thank you very much. Justin, you've got your hand up. Do you want to have a follow-up question?
No, it's just to follow up with that, but to thank Ian Lovery on that, and to say hello again to Ian. It's been a long time. To me, my experience is that quite often that kind of power dynamics also plays out in terms of the risk and the risk situation, where the prime, in a way, often will try and push down the risk, especially reputational, financial, as well as contractual risk, to a lesser or a lower party into the sub-levels. And a lot of smaller organizations are often exposed very clearly in terms of institutional risk around that, because of that kind of relationship that, you want to be part of the consortium. It comes with a lot of kudos and positioning. It comes with a greater emphasis in developing your own organization, and also the financial benefits, but also it is around that exposure to these risks at senior level, which is not often played out in that kind of governance level. So I understand where this is getting to, but it is something that I've seen more and more so, where the primes often will now take on the contractual responsibility with institutional donors, but then they will pass on that reputational and that kind of risk components, even in the contractual side, into the lesser parties. So those lesser parties, in a way, are often, what I would say, going into these things with their eyes wide shut, because they don't fully appreciate what it means to be signing into these kind of consortia. I do think there is that kind of means that there needs to be a lot more pushback and being understanding of what those contracts look like. And from my experience with DFID, that's very easy to be seen. Thanks anyway.
Thank you, Justin. I guess connected to that, Ian, you mentioned that there was a code of conduct being developed. Is that still work in progress, or has that been formalised? Hi, Ian.
Beg your pardon, there you go. Yeah, that was just an idea, but it was just and a very recent idea. Just this week, it came up in a bond commercial contracting a meeting on Monday, and I noted it just because, yes, I think it's the key problem is the power dynamics and protecting oneself. And Justin's right. Some smaller organisations or less experienced organisations can be pushed around. And some more aggressive primes. Certainly, I've seen subcontracts where you're being legally indemnified or liable for more financial risk than even the size of your program. So you get a £500,000 program, and they ask you to be liable for greater than that. So you have some primes who are getting the lion's share of profits, for example, justifying it because they're the prime and are burdening the risk. But actually what they then do in their contracting is push out all of the risk and more to all of the subcontracted partners. So, I mean, these do depend on the sort of primes you work with, but I think, yes, just is right. Some organizations could go into these things with their eyes wide shut. You do need to be aware of some slightly more aggressive practices. So the code of conduct was just an idea, but it was just flagging it because, yeah, there is concerns that smaller NGOs are being pushed around, are being used to bid candy on bids, named but then given no meaningful role thereafter, and possibly certain things like the liability, risk, and areas that they're not so familiar with, being NGOs, possibly being pushed around a bit.
Great. And was that proposal made through one of the bond groups, or was that sitting just within WaterAid at the moment?
No, that came up at the bond commercial contracting group this week, as an idea floated by TPI, the Partnership Initiative. So certainly it was met with a sort of a warm response, and people were concerned that it might not be possible to get, the likes of KPMG or Crown Agents to sign up to any kind of agreement. But my thinking was, well, you could write a general code of conduct written on behalf of NGOs and how we ought to work together with private sector actors in particular. And you don't have to get every single private sector to sign up to it, but you could use that in your negotiations when approaching a prime, say, would you be comfortable with adhering to the principles of the NGO private sector code of conduct for consortia, where it doesn't have to be signed by everybody, but you use it in your negotiations, and could also be quite a good checklist, especially for those who are less familiar. Look at the governance arrangements, ensure it's clear, look at representation, look at visibility, make sure all these things are addressed in your contract and discussed at minimum. So that was the idea, and just a recent one, but it shows there's a strong concern.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thanks, Ian. So Japs asked a question, which is a really good one. Before we come to that, I just wanted to invite Plan if they had any feedback from their side, because obviously they're part of the consortium that you're working on as well. So this going back to this question of how do you manage that prime role versus all being kind of equal partners, and any reflections from Plan's side on what's helped that to go well?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, from Plan side, our experience has been often just collaboration and cooperation, I think. And so consulting partners, especially on the ground and also in headquarters level, if you're looking to have a relative, if you're looking to have a representative in the headquarters office as well, it's just keeping that dialogue open and discussing with partners. I think it was mentioned in the presentation about the use of coordination meetings. I think especially where it's a complex program, they're key, especially when working with multiple partners. But yeah, I think largely for us, at least from my experience, it's been that cooperation and collaboration that's aided kind of beneficial working.
Great, thanks very much. So it sounds like there's something there about, I guess, just the culture of how you work together, so the cooperation, collaboration, and then some of the more formal kind of structures, so having the scheduled coordination meetings themselves, that's helped. Great, thank you. So Japs asked...
Jump into Japs. Oh, beg your pardon, I thought it was Japs' point there. I was going to mention that there was a discussion point and there was a small working group brainstormed for about 15 minutes on how to be ready to be tender ready, commercial ready. So there's a page of flip charts from Monday that hopefully been written up by the commercial contracting group to address this. Wasn't in that group, but there's things like ensuring you have good costing, financial management capacity, as opposed to just budget management, very traditional, simple to manage. You get your money in advance, you have a budget, you spend against, you report it. The financial management and modelling is much more complex, legal capacity, etc. So there was a brainstorm list of things that people need to be aware of. But I think the first conversation that organisations need to have themselves internally is their appetite for risk, and also their interest in being a prime or consortia lead. WaterAid reflects that it can be a distraction to set up a commercial contracting unit and to go for these things. and it feels probably more comfortable than just adding its wash skills to other larger consortium. And where there are going to be integrated wash areas, for example, wash in health, wash in education, we recognise it might be a smaller part of the whole. So as a rule, Waterways has those conversations and said we're more likely to be an attractive prime as opposed to attractive subcontracted partner as opposed to be a prime. So that's a key conversation to have as well. You might get to the end of this conversation and decide you don't want all the legal risk and the bureaucracy and machinery within your INGO. You might feel it's a distraction for you. Certainly that was our feeling.
That's really interesting, thank you. Any follow-up questions, Jap?
No follow-up question in particular, but if such a list of things to consider or brainstorming questions have been developed, it would be great if it can be shared. I'm not sure if that's possible at all. Can it be circulated, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, offline, I'll talk to Lucy and link her up with the head of the commercial contracting group, Brandon, who works for Concern Worldwide, is very supportive and active and helping lead that group. And they should be writing up those notes. So I'll link up with Lucy and make sure, if she isn't already, Brandon's details.
Great. All right. Thank you.
These two sister bond groups together.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. It was going to be a question I was going to ask during this call as well, because I'm sure that people have different resources that may be useful for people that are on the call and part of the wider group. I know that within BRC, I've had permission to share an in-track study on review of consortia as a cooperation mechanism. This was in relation to the Nordic National Red Cross Societies in particular, but some of the learning I think is relevant for any consortia, so happy to share that. But we'll come back to that question towards the end of the call, and yeah, really happy to collect on behalf of the group and share those back afterwards. So a question has come in from Tracy. So she says, do you have experience of working in consortia with local civil society organisations? And I guess it also connects to this issue of localisation. So WaterAid, do you have experience of working with local civil society organisations and potentially with voluntary groups?
Hello.
Hi, Lovey, we can hear you.
Yeah, so for WaterAid Madagascar, we have a project funded by European Union in which we are working with civil society organizations, local ones actually, and including sports associations, and they are working in a volunteering basis. And for this actually, it's quite difficult as well to have civil society, local civil society organization in a partnership, because we need at the same time to ensure that we build their capacity, and we have to ensure as well that we have equal power in the consortium. So there is as well this challenge on how can we ensure that the local civil society organization will be empowered during the course of the project.
Thank you, Lovey. Did you have any follow-up questions, Tracy?
No, not really. I guess it's just the power thing that we've just been discussing is writ large when we're working with local civil society organisations. And I guess there's a wider question that I suppose we'll answer here about, you know, if some local civil society organisation get known for working in consortia, what does that do to civil society as a whole in the country? So just some thoughts about that.
Just to chip in on that question, the payment by results program that I worked with John and did obviously at the end of our delivery chain, the most important people are the partners on the ground. We chose not to expose them to the risk of payment by results contracting, and kept a relatively traditional partnership agreements that in place there. And as a whole, most of the partners were quite grateful for that, and it may not have been responsible for dump this on them or push this risk down on them, because the risk would be far too high for them to burden. There were one or two instances with some of our partners in Pakistan who thought the payment by results model was very interesting, and they felt they would like to be more involved, however. So maybe in some situations of being too patronizing or not actually exposing them to this new way of working, which will affect them in future. So we try to protect them, but possibly maybe underexposing them as well.
Thanks, Ian. I noticed that as the presentations were happening, there were a couple of people that joined the call. I think also didn't have a chance to introduce themselves. So I think Dina joined, and also Min joined. So if you would both be happy just to say briefly, to introduce yourself, say which organisation you're from, and also what your experience of working on consortia are, that would be really interesting for the group.
Hi, yes, it's Dina. Thank you, and sorry that I was late into the call. I work for Finchurch Aid, and my role is working on strategic partnerships. So, and it's quite a new role. So, trying to diversify the institutional donor relationships that we have further, and part of that is to develop relationships with some of other international NGOs so that we can think about consortia. The most recent experience we had was with the UK Aid Connect, where we had that kind of diverse expectation from DFID to pull together different actors together to meet with some of the expectations that they had. And we were working on the theme on freedom of religion and belief. The experience from that was interesting in the sense that it was a bit chaotic to start with, to find those the relevant partners that would respond to the guidelines of the call. And I think we learned a lot from that we need to be much more primed and ready to have those conversations about the way we sell ourselves firstly, and to also to narrow down the kind of expectations and just to see the wood for the trees. But I think part of that, the issues around that particular call was DFID hadn't really prepared the NGOs for the expectations that they had in good enough time. And I think going in for another call like that, we'll be much better prepared and we know what we'll be looking for. So this particular call has been very useful for us, at least, and so we can see how we can perhaps organise some kind of code of conducts and understand better what our unique selling points are. Thank you.
Thanks, Lina. Really nice to meet you.
You too.
And Min, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself and say where you work and the kinds of partnerships that you're involved in? I'm going to unmute you, see if that helps. Hi, Min, can you hear me? No, maybe not. Okay. So I think I guess connected to the last conversation around, well, particularly your point, Dina, about it being quite chaotic at the start, and I guess learning by doing. And I was just wondering if there are any circumstances in people's experience in which consortia just aren't relevant or aren't workable. Or is it always worth a try? I think from the Red Cross perspective, then the Red Cross has a set of 7 fundamental principles. So we basically will only work with organisations that would subscribe to those core principles of neutrality and impartiality, for example. So we wouldn't feel comfortable going into consortia with organisations that didn't sign up to those core principles. And I think that within the Red Cross, Red Crescent family, we tend to be each other's kind of primary partners. And so a lot of the consortia that I've seen so far through the Red Cross, Red Crescent kind of family tend to be with other Red Cross or Red Crescent members, because there's that basis of understanding already about what those fundamental principles are and ways of working. So I think there's a bit of a natural resistance to looking outside of that family, but I think there's actually huge value as well. But I think it would come back for us very much to the question of whether other organisations would subscribe to the same values that we did. Do people have any other questions or things they wanted to contribute?
Lucy, hi, it's Jane. I was just wondering, when you just made that point about the core principles and one of them being neutrality, how do you incorporate elements of advocacy into consortia working that you do? Because for us, that often there's a bit of a balance between, sort of in our development work, we do a lot of advocacy and obviously in our humanitarian, but it's a bit more tricky on the humanitarian side because of that neutrality principle. I was wondering how you work around that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point. I think other members of the Red Cross, please feel free to chip in. But my experience is that there's a lot of diplomacy, but there's not always strong advocacy. I think that's where the movement itself is complex, because it consists of the 190 different national societies, of which British Red Cross is one. It consists of the Federation, which is the collective of those, but also the Secretariat. And then it also consists of ICRC, who have a particular mandate and can take quite a strong advocacy line. Excuse me. The extent to which national societies are able to be vocal in advocacy, particularly towards governments, really varies depending on the context. So I'd say it will depend on who the other members of that consortium might be and what the context is that they operate within. So within the UK, for example, then actually British Red Cross has been quite vocal about government support to the National Health Service and described it as a humanitarian crisis, the fact that people were not getting the kind of care that they needed. So we have been able to be vocal, but I think that was because of our relationship with the government. We felt able to make that statement. I think in other countries it's much more sensitive, so I think that would probably be more of a diplomatic route, but recognising that there's a place for quite strong advocacy and that other organisations can play a part in that. Justin, any other thoughts on that one from your side?
Only to say, but I think you've outlined it very clearly. I think a lot of local organisations within the Red Cross movement are more risk adverse to being more vocal, or in fear of undermining that relationship with the national disaster management entity or its government relationships. Often a lot of its governing boards are very politically positioned as well, which is something that it has to be taken into account. That a lot of the board members are appointees, and that's often a real challenge to take a position, even if it's neutral and independent. It is often challenged to actually say something more publicly in its own domain.
Thanks, Justin. I've got a very different kind of question now, and it's a shame Vivian doesn't have a mic, because this one may need her support as well. So I guess I'm thinking, so there's a lot of discussion within the Red Cross at the moment about how to increase aid effectiveness, and seeing consortia and closer working as one way to do that. But then I think it also then begs the question, how do you track the value and the impacts of more complex partnerships like a consortia partnership? So how do you track, for example, the cost saving of working together in that way? And how do you track the overall impact on affected communities, on end service users in a more effective way of working? So has anyone tried to tackle that question? Maybe not.
I will send you a paper that Louisa, our partnership advisor, circulated a few months ago, talking about consortia and quoting a study where they found that 40% of consortia who formed never actually went on to deliver anything. Just injecting a degree of skepticism into this this new magic bullet we have with consortia. So I can forward that publication that Louisa circulated to us, but obviously not all consortia are happy processes, and they're very time consuming. You can, like with any bidding process, you can invest a lot of time and get the end of it and not get anywhere really. But in fact, VWald has just noted it's going to always be impossible because you'll never know the counterfactual. And the same conversations we've had abound with payment by results as the new magic bullet. We'll never really quite get the counterfactual. Can you fund two identical programs, one with payment by results, one without, one with consortium, one without? But certainly general feedback from INGOs and their experience with consortia has not been entirely glowing. So we have to be open, but skeptical as well.
Thank you. So Vivian from British Red Cross, who's our senior PML advisor, says it's always difficult to attribute impact to a consortia, especially if there's no counterfactual. I think I would look more at effectiveness and efficiency and scope. And Liz is saying, linked to this, if any of the organisations here have operational partnership models or elements of models for working in partnerships for humanitarian response, then please do share. The programme that she's working on is reviewing evidence for effective partnerships for localisation and will include research into such models to highlight best practice and learning. So yeah, feel free after this call to email things to me and I'll share them back out with the group. And Justin is asking, in terms of payment by results contracts, has anyone looked at underwriting or insurance arrangements? Justin, do you want to give a bit more background to that one?
Well, it's just a question because it is quite an exposure, both financially, to go into contractual engagement, as Ian, you said about, and then in the risk of something happening and not being able to fulfill that contractual responsibility, how it does expose organizations, both financially as well as reputationally. But I wondered if anybody's looked at kind of a financial tools outside the kind of sector within the financial market to help in a way to protect themselves from not being able to deliver or fulfill that contract.
It's an interesting question, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be that people in this group have experience of that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions or reflections as we draw towards the end of the call? I think for me, one of the biggest kind of questions is whether, I guess, what the trigger is for a consortia. And I think it's really interesting how WaterAid you were describing, like sometimes there will be a call and then that's the trigger for when you start to then look for other partners to work with. And I think that's certainly been our experience as well in the past. I think what's interesting within British Red Cross is a move to, I guess, a more proactive approach around developing programs and identifying how we want to work together in advance. And so in a way that the funding would be a nice extra, but that you already have established those partnerships and that you've already established the overall kind of objective that you're working towards together. And then if a bid comes up that matches, then you're already strongly positioned to move forward together. But I guess there will also always be an opportunistic element as well of say, suddenly a new call for funding comes up and people then look to see who would be best placed to partner with. But yeah, if anyone else has any reflections on those triggers for consortia working, it would be interesting to hear. Sounds like nothing else to add at the moment. So it feels like sort of coming to the end of the conversation. Any final points or questions from people before we wrap up? Okay. Well, I just want to say thanks to Ian and to Levi for your presentations. I've been taking lots of post-it notes, frantically scribbling on them. I think a really rich conversation, and I think Ian, I think what I found really interesting from your presentation was around your reflection that the inclusion of academic partners and technical kind of M&E partnerships really helped up your game, particularly when it comes to payment by results. So, and also your point about how restricted funding can increase the quality of programs as they are forced to be more accountable. I guess there's a question about accountable to who, but still I think that sometimes, you know, institutional funding, restricted funding can be seen as quite negative, but I think that's a really positive example of how it's helped to increase the quality of the programming. I think what was really interesting was this, you know, the opportunities that are clear from working in consortia, but also some of those challenges. And I think, again, one of the takeaways from the presentation was the need for harmonising between operating procedures and you know, sort of M&E approaches, and also that sometimes they can be more political than technical, so they don't always work. It's not always successful, but still I think increasingly this is the direction of travel for the sector, and I guess for the commercial sector as well. So thanks everyone, lots to think about, lots to take away. As I said earlier, if you have any resources that you'd like to share with the group, please send them on to me and I'm happy to share them back afterwards. I'll also be sharing a recording from today with the group as well. So great speaking to you, and thanks very much.
Thanks.
You're welcome.